Gemini 3.6 Flash cost 3.3 times less than Claude Opus 5, input and output. Every single token. That's $1.50 versus $5 on input, $7.50 versus $25 on output. And yet Claude Opus 5 still has a real case to make. Both models dropped recently, and the pricing gap is wide enough that picking the wrong one could seriously hurt your API budget. So I'm comparing Claude Opus 5 versus Gemini 3.6 across 5 real tests, pulling from verified sources only, no vendor spin. And honestly, the part that got me was the reasoning accuracy test, because one model just has no comparable data published at all, and that changes the whole decision. All right, so this comparison is for you if you're building workflows on API, running agentic code tasks, or doing deep research at volume. Pick the wrong model, and you're either overpaying by 3 times or leaving serious reasoning capability on the table, and both outcomes cost you just in different ways. Okay, test 1, API pricing. This one stings if you get it wrong. Run a high volume pipeline on the wrong model and you could be burning 3 times your budget every single month without noticing until the invoice hits. So I pulled the official pricing pages from Anthropic and Google. Claude Opus 5 runs $5 per million input tokens and $25 on output. Gemini 3.6 Flash, $1.50 input, $7.50 output. That's a consistent 3.3 times gap across both directions. And what surprised me is how clean and uniform it is, no trade-off, just cheaper across the board. Gemini 3.6 takes this one, no contest. I was honestly expecting some output token trade-off where Claude closes the gap a little, but nope, 3.3 times cheaper on both ends. And if unit economics matter to you at all, that gap is pretty hard to ignore. Gemini leads 1-0. Test 2 context window. This one breaks workflows in a really specific way. You feed a model a full code base or a long document, and it starts hallucinating details it already saw. And that's when the output falls apart completely and you lose all the time you put in. What I found here is pretty straightforward. Both Claude Opus 5 and Gemini 3.6 Flash top out at 1 million tokens, confirmed by Anthropic stocks and built fast with ICE Gemini review. So for context length alone, there's genuinely nothing to separate them right now. Now, I want to be straight with you. Matching numbers don't mean identical performance inside that window. And how well each model actually retrieves the right details from deep in the context is a real question. But we just don't have clean head-to-head data on it yet. This one's a tie. I was expecting Gemini to have a smaller window given the Flash pricing tier, but both land at exactly 1 million tokens, so context window alone won't make this decision for you. Running tally, Gemini 1, Claude 0, 1 tied. Test 3, real-time info and knowledge cutoff. This one breaks you in a frustrating way. You ask about something that happened 2 months ago, and the model either confidently gives you stale info or just says it doesn't know. And either way, your workflow stalls because you're chasing down facts the model should already have. So when I dug into the data, Claude Opus 5 has a May 2026 knowledge cutoff, which is 2 months fresher than Gemini 3.6 Flash's March 2026 cutoff. But Gemini has always on Google search built right in with no tool call needed, while Claude's web access is tool-based. So you have to wire it up yourself. Another tie, and this one's genuinely split. I was expecting Claude to come out ahead on cutoff recency alone, but Gemini's always-on search kind of cancels that out for most real workflows. And which one wins really depends on whether you want fresher training data or zero-friction live search. Tally sits at Gemini 1, Claude 0, 2 tied. Test for reasoning accuracy. This is where the stakes get really concrete. Because if your model can't reason through multi-step problems, it doesn't just give you a wrong answer, it gives you a confidently wrong answer that you might actually ship, and that's way more expensive to fix than just picking the right model upfront. Okay, so what surprised me here is the data gap. Claude Opus 5 scored 43.3% on Frontier Bench version 0.1, more than double what its predecessor scored. And on Arc AGI 3, it came in 3 times higher than the next best model. Those are vendor claimed numbers, so take them with a grain of salt, but they're notable. Gemini 3.6 Flash has nothing published on either benchmark. Tie by default, and honestly, that's the most interesting result so far. I was expecting at least some Gemini data to compare against, but there's just nothing published, and you can't hand Claude the win when it hasn't been tested against the same benchmarks. Tally moves to Gemini 1, Claude 0, 3 tied. Test 5 code generation. This one costs you time in the worst possible way. You run an agentic coding task, the model gets 80% of the way there, then writes broken logic in the last function, and you spend an hour debugging something that should have just worked. Bad code generation is slow and expensive. So I looked at what both models have published here, and again, the benchmarks don't overlap. Gemini 3.6 Flash scored 58.7% on StubVue Bench Pro and 49% on DeepStubVue version 1.1, which are solid code repair numbers, while Claude Opus 5 came in within 0.5% of Fable 5's peak on Cursor Bench at half the cost of Fable. Different tests, different setups, so bear that in mind. Tie again, and I think this one's actually the most honest tie of the bunch. I was expecting one of them to clearly dominate code, but they're just good at different things on different tests, and no overlapping benchmark means no clean winner. Final score: Gemini 1, Claude 0, 4 tied. So here's where Claude Opus 5 is genuinely the better pick. It scored 43.3% on Frontier Bench, more than double its own predecessor, and on Arc AGI 3, it came in 3 times higher than the next best model. Plus, its knowledge cutoff is May 2026, 2 months fresher than Gemini's. So if deep reasoning is your bottleneck, Claude is the one. And here's where Gemini 3.6 Flash is clearly the better call. It's 3.3 times cheaper on API, both input and output. It has always on Google search with no tool setup required. It scored 58.7% on SWE Bench Pro for code repair, and the Ultra subscription is a published $99.99 a month, so you know exactly what you're paying. Honestly, I went into this expecting a cleaner split, but most tests ended in ties because the benchmarks just don't overlap. So here's the decision rule. If you need deep reasoning, complex multi-step logic, or agentic coding at near peak quality, go Claude Opus 5. If you need volume, live search, for cost control, Gemini 3.6 Flash is probably enough. 3.3 times cheaper on every token is pretty hard to argue with.